Good evening, everybody. My name is Reverend Bruce Beisner, and it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome you all to tonight's program. Before we begin, I wanted to just acknowledge that, this past weekend we saw the worst of our humanity in the violent attacks on our Muslim friends in New Zealand. And I can tell you that the people of this church, several members of the church and I, took it upon ourselves on Friday morning to come on over and to make some little signs and to put some signs out in front of our church along the road. Signs just expressing our support and our care and our concern for our Muslim friends right here in Clear Lake in the wake of such a tragedy. And we got our signs out there just in time for all of our friends from the Clear Lake Islamic Center to come by and see them on the way to their Friday prayers. And I will tell you that doing that taught me two things. The first was that there's a lot of power in just simple acts of neighborly kindness. In the days following that, just yesterday morning, actually, Sheikh Kamir from the Clear Lake Islamic Center came by my office to personally thank me and to tell me how much those expressions of support meant to him and to the people of his community. The other thing that it taught me is the power of technology. Because within a couple of hours of us putting just those little cardboard signs out along our road, photos of them appeared in social media and began being shared with people all across our country, and I believe a few people in other parts of the world as well. I actually got a phone call from the president of our UU association, our denomination, who had somehow come across them on social media. We had hundreds of people clicking like and sharing these pictures and talking about this online. Tonight's presentation is about technology, and it's about how technology can bring us together in difficult times like this past weekend, but also how technology can divide us, can be used to divide us. And so being mindful about how we interact with technology and information, being mindful consumers, is a really important part of our calling as citizens, as good people, as people who are trying to live together in peace. Thank you all for being here tonight. Speaking of technology, if anybody's having any trouble hearing me, we do have these wonderful hearing assist devices. There are some of them available in the basket right outside the doors. The other thing is, can everybody see okay? Because I have been told that if we want to bring the lights and make them brighter or make them dimmer, all we have to do is say, Alexa, that's our new technology here. So, I'm not sure if they actually will get any brighter. This may be the brightest they get. So, but I did want to mention that that's one of our new things we're very proud of here. I'm not so sure how I feel about it. I'm getting used to it. So thank you again for being here. I hope this is a wonderful evening of learning for us all. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Bob Handy, who's going to introduce our speaker. Bob?
Thank you, Reverend Beisner. And by the way, it doesn't work. I asked Alexa to turn the lights on earlier this evening, and only some of them came on. I had to figure it out. And I appreciate all of you being here with us again tonight. I'm especially pleased to see and to introduce tonight's speaker once again. He has spoken here before. I think this is your third time. Yes, I asked you to come back, so you must be good. And we have periodic contact with one another through our involvement with the University of St. Thomas's Center for International Studies as well. Eric Box is Security Project Manager at Swailes Company, a Houston-based investigative and security consulting firm. He served for 31 years with the U.S. Department of State as a Foreign Service officer and a civil servant. In the Foreign Service, he served in 4 overseas posts as Consul at the U.S. Embassy in Nassau, Bahamas, Consul at the U.S. Embassy in Dublin, Deputy Chief of Non-Immigrant and Immigrant Visas and Anti-Fraud Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, and as Assistant Administrative Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo. He later transferred to the Civil Service, becoming an Assistant Director Information Security Officer of the Houston Passport Agency. He earned his BA in Political Science from St. Mary's University, San Antonio, graduating magna cum laude in 1980, followed by graduate studies there, and most recently he earned his Master's of Security Management for Executives at the University of Houston downtown. He has also earned a number of cyber-related certifications. He is an adjunct lecturer on cyber issues at the University of Houston downtown and adjunct professor of international studies at the University of St. Thomas. We are privileged to have him again. Please join me in welcoming him back.
I almost didn't recognize who he was talking about. Is that me? Okay, so how many of you read the article? Could you sleep afterward? And are things really that bad? They're worse. Oh. But there is a ray of sunshine, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to weave in and out of the article and fill it in with some other stuff. So we know that back in December of this year, Director Dan Coates of the Director of National Intelligence submitted a report to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So this is actually in January. And he was commenting on what are it's an annual threat assessment that they give to both to the Congress, to the Senate Select Committee, and also on the House Select Committee. But you can download it and you can read it. And interestingly enough, if you go back over the last 2 or 3 of these reports, you'll notice that there's been a change in the threat landscape vis-a-vis what our intelligence services are telling Congress where we should be most mindful in terms of attending to the threat and also dedicating resources. He focused on cyber as the number one threat to the United States. And I thought that was interesting. Terrorism is in there. Weapons of mass destruction. That's also a threat. Pandemic. They mentioned pandemic as a threat. But number one threat was cyber. And I thought that was very interesting. I'm going to tell you right now, I am not an expert in cyber. There are no experts in cyber. Right? It is a field or a phenomenon, I will say, that is an emerging quality, and it changes so rapidly that and I tell this to some of my students, if you go out and you get yourself a degree in computer science, by the time you get your degree, most of the information you learn is obsolete. And so it will be it'll be incumbent upon you to commit yourself to lifetime learning and to be comfortable with not knowing a whole lot. And what you did know probably isn't going to help you. Okay, so you have to stay up on the discipline. So I liked this one statement from Director Coates. He said, "Some have said it almost makes you yearn for the Cold War days when you knew who the bad guys were, who the good guys were, and there was a wall dividing us." In other words, some certainty to the situation. Well, there really isn't any certainty now. Well, let's talk a little bit about the operational conditions. Obviously, threats to U.S. national security are expanding and diversifying. They will in the coming year, driven in part by China and Russia. China and Russia were key in the intelligence assessment as the main threat actors that we need to be concerned about. This competition between China, Russia, and the United States cuts across a lot of domains, and it moves us off of the I would say, the traditional national security framework where you could almost have a sense of certitude. You could almost rely on having a military infrastructure that would provide the security. So you had your military, you had your intelligence services, we have a very vibrant economy, and there were rules. Well, that's all kind of fracturing. The rules that we built the post-war system after the Second World War, those rules are starting to come apart. They're frayed. The interesting thing about the assessment is he said that China and Russia, their attack strategies and their foreign policies are becoming more and more aligned with us as a focal point. That's not really a good thing. So he listed cyber, number one, and we're trying, and at the end of this, as I fold through this, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing as a not only a government, because this is an all hands on deck. There's a lot of really exciting, good stuff happening in terms of cyber defense, digital forensics within the private sector and in universities, working together, and we work really well with government. It's probably one of the few areas I've seen where there's this amazing level of cooperation and communication between government, private, and the nonprofit or academia. So one of the questions was whether or not the U.S. is a net winner or a net loser as a result of the struggle in cyberspace. No drum roll. For me, the answer is clear. We are losing badly. And this, I don't mean to be provocative in this, but I say some of this is evidence in the election of Donald Trump. But it's not merely his election, but the degradation of the political discourse and the level of anger and tribalization which has become a feature of American life. The norms are eroding faster than we can adapt to the changes. Now, I make that point by saying it's not as important to me who gets elected, but the environment under which they were elected. So if our democratic institutions were attacked and that we as a country, we lose the ability to have a civil dialogue with one another. For someone like Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence services, those are vulnerabilities to be exploited. And you have to look at it. So part of it, I tell my students at St. Thomas, put on your evil hat. Sometimes we have Black Hat Day and I wear a black hat and I say, okay, we're going to think like an attacker. So we're going to look at an institution or a sector or an enterprise and we're going to say, let's talk about where the vulnerabilities are. How can we exploit them? What are our goals and what do we need to do? So I would contend that part of the difficulty we have in mitigating this threat from the Chinese and Russia is that they are very, very good at doing an assessment of our vulnerabilities. So the author, Andrus, he made the statement that most Americans are assured by our military posture and believe that it provides a level of security for which they can take some comfort. He also laments the lack of geopolitical education at U.S. University. I have to put a plug in, not at St. Thomas, right? We are there in a granular way. He also faults the United States for lack of imagination on the part of leadership to see the potential and harness the capabilities of cyber operations as an instrument of national power. I'm not going to be so hard on leadership. It's because it's a generational divide. Even within our military. So I go on all these chat sites with military officers, and you can clearly see the dividing line between those military officers, especially general officers, who came out of the post-World War II Cold War school, maybe did their combat experience in Vietnam or the Gulf War. They have very definite mindset, but you have a new cadre of younger officers coming in, some of them right out of West Point, are very young, who understand the capabilities and vulnerabilities and the extent to which cyber operations can be a force multiplier or can be a major threat against our system. They're beginning to talk to each other. They're beginning to develop a common language. That's a good thing, but it's going to take a while because bureaucracies are slow and you got to kind of work your way up the food chain. but a lot of these guys, and I'm using guys euphemistically, male or female, a lot of people find that the bureaucracy is frustrating, so we have this hemorrhage of mid-rank officers that are leaving the military going into the private sector. So he suggests that the American leaders ought to learn from their Chinese counterparts. Okay. He also mentioned something that I thought was very interesting. He talked about the vulnerability, the connectivity of the world, and he looked at some previous systems like the railroads and sailing ships and all that. I thought it was kind of interesting when he said that, someone could circumnavigate the globe faster than somebody can move a wagon train a couple of 100 miles. I'm thinking, so he didn't know about Magellan. It took him 3 years, right? No, not really. But anyway, let me go to this slide first. Okay, so I found, after reading Anders, I decided to do some research. And are any of you familiar with a guy named Nicholas Spikeman? Nicholas Spikeman is an American political scientist. He served at Yale University and the University of California in Berkeley. He's considered the founder of the realist school of American foreign policy. And he has this concept they call the Rimland concept. And he, one of his quotes was that whoever controlled the Rimland controlled the destiny of the world. So I want to bring that back. So what are we talking about? Well, right now, China is engaged in this One Belt, One Road. Have you heard of this? Sometimes talked about as the New Silk Road, where they're going to, where you see the Rimland, right? And they're going to build an infrastructure, a communications and transportation infrastructure to move goods and services from China into Europe and across Central Asia. And they are sweetening the pot in each one of these places by huge infrastructure projects and loans. So it sort of fits into the concept that the author talked about in terms of how you bring about world connectivity. So let's take it to the cyber domain. So you hear all this talk about 5G. Huawei, right? What's this 5G? It's essentially the Chinese and the United States are in this race to see which country is going to develop a digital infrastructure that will move data much faster than the current infrastructure to facilitate things like the Internet of Things. Everybody heard of the Internet of Things? So, they're trying to get rid of us, right? They want to do away with human agency. We'll all have self-driving cars and self-driving everything, and your television set will talk to your refrigerator and tell you when you need to buy milk, and then it'll just order the milk directly, and then this robot will show up at your front door, and it will already have deducted the cost from your credit card, and you get your milk and say, but I don't want to drink any milk. So what's going to facilitate all that is 5G. So that's what we're being told. We're being sold this. And the Chinese are ahead, and the U.S. government is saying, don't buy their stuff because there's backdoors in it, and they can get into all your data. And so what this really is the competition. This is another level of the competition between the United States and China. And who's going to write the rules for the next architecture that's going to control cyberspace? That is what's in play. Anders mentioned Stuxnet because we're going to talk a little bit about the military side of it a bit. So anybody not know what Stuxnet was? Anybody know what Stuxnet? Okay. So in 2010, we had a problem with the Iranians, right? The Iranians were building, we think they were building a nuclear weapon. They were doing some suspicious stuff, right? They had these gas centrifuges enriching uranium up to a level we thought was going to make it bomb weapons grade. So, depending on who you read, the United States and Israel, although we disavow, we don't admit to doing anything, but everybody said, well, it had to be the motive, means, and opportunity, right? So I'm going to make this real quick. A piece of malware was developed. It got into their system, and it started destroying their centrifuges. Wiped out a couple thousand of them. Why was this a big deal? This was a big deal because it was the first time a cyber weapon had the effect of a kinetic attack. A kinetic attack is usually things that blow up stuff and break things, right? Bombs. That's the kinetic warfare. That's typically how warfare has been fought for a long time, is you blow up things, break things, and kill people. Cyberspace Stuxnet kind of did something very different. It destroyed equipment that was critical, what we believe, critical in developing a technology that might threaten ourselves and our allies. But it did it in a way that with very, very limited collateral damage. So, well, this is something new. One problem with cyber offensive warfare weapons. Stuxnet was designed to destroy itself. It didn't get a chance to do it. So when the Iranians, the Iranians never discovered what was happening, people on the outside, Germans and Americans and cyber forensic people and cyber security people, they discovered what was going on because the controllers that were controlling these centrifuges was made by a German company. And the Iranians complained to the Germans saying, your equipment's faulty, and the Germans said, it is not. Yes, it is not. Okay, we'll test it. And when they were doing the test, they discovered something. So, that little piece of Stuxnet, now there's all kind of baby Stuxnets. Little baby Stuxnet juniors just multiply, and they're on the dark web, and they're being used by other countries, and they're attacking other systems. So one of the downsides from having cyber weapons is that the boomerang effect. They can come back and get you. Let's see if I can go back to Russia. Okay, Russia. So we hear a lot about Russia, right? The DNC hack and all that stuff. The Russians in 2007 and in 2008, they used cyber warfare, but in a different way. It wasn't quite like we did. Stuxnet was very specific to one target in one sector to achieve one result. So in 2007, the Russians did something a little different. And we all know about the Estonia thing, right? Everybody knows about the Estonia. So what happened is that, real quick, there was a bronze statue of a Soviet soldier in Tallinn. You can't make this stuff up. And the Estonian government wanted to move it out of town to a cemetery where other Russian soldiers were, because they're no longer part of the Russian bloc anymore, right? They're an independent country, so they said, we're just moving this thing. Well, there was a lot of Russian speakers in Estonia. There's a lot of people who took umbrage with this. And interestingly enough, it somehow crossed the threshold where the Russians felt compelled to attack Estonia. But they did it as a cyber attack. I don't want to get too technical on it, but essentially they overloaded. Estonia's a little country. They overloaded their system with a lot of data from outside. And it crashed the country for about a week and a half to 2 weeks. There's a philosophy behind this, or there is a mindset that is driven by a couple of great actors in Russia that I follow quite closely to see where they're going, because where they go, they take Russia with them. One is a guy named Valery Gerasimov, who's the chief of staff of the Russian military. He's developed a concept called hybrid warfare. They used it to great effect when they attacked Georgia, but even better effect when they attacked Crimea and Ukraine. So what they do, they initiate hostilities with a cyber attack. Usually it starts off with propaganda through social media, vilifying the country, and trying to create social divisions, fracture lines in the country. A lot of it could be complete fake, what we call fake news, or propaganda. And then the next thing they do is they just start disrupting communications. either by cyber warfare, or some of it is by jamming, but they'll take down a phone system and things like that. And then after that, when there's enough confusion, they bring in the special operations forces, like they did in the Crimea. It was really great. So in the Crimea, remember the little green men? The little green guys had their faces covered. They had green uniforms, no insignia. All the vehicles had no insignia on them. And then we were told, Russia said, it's not us, it's not us, it's not us. No. It's not us. Those are Crimean separatists, right? Separatists with Buk missiles and T-80 tanks and all this equipment that you don't just get 5 guys off the street and they know how to operate. It takes training to operate this stuff, right? And how did somehow we find out all this? Well, some of these guys were actually, the Russians, were sending messages back home saying, hey, Mom, I thought I was going on a training exercise, but I'm in Crimea, or I'm in eastern Ukraine. I'll send you a picture of me in front of the tank. So Russia has since banned their soldiers from using social media, right? Because they were giving away a lot of this stuff. So the other guy, so Gerasimov, they had built this hybrid warfare into their military training and their doctrine. They have electronic warfare and cyber warfare units integrated into the command. They also use what they call patriotic hackers. So there's a big movement in Russia called the Nashi movement. Nashi means ours in Russian. And these are patriotic Russians, a lot of young people. And what they do, they have a website. And so you can go to their website, you can go to the Nashi website, and you can download a remote access tool, a bot for your own computer, so that you can be part of Russia's attack on its enemies. You're lending your computing power to the nation to take care of the bad guys. Then you can also download, they'll give you hacking tools and stuff like that too, so you can kind of play along. So there's about 120,000 of these people. So they can take their computers and they can aim it at a target and do a denial of service attack. So it's kind of fun for the whole family, right? So the question always comes up, do we do these kinds of things? Do we do these kinds of things? Well, here's the problem. We have a different mindset. We tend to go after military targets or like Stuxnet. So it wouldn't have occurred to the United States to take down all of Iranian social media. We wouldn't have done that. We go after Stuxnet. Recently, there's an institution in Russia called the Internet Research Agency. You guys heard about the IRA? Whenever I hear IRA, it takes me back to Dublin. Wrong IRA. Internet Research Agency is basically it's kind of like a hacker school, but it's also full of people who are paid every day to create fake news on social media, attack bots, and all this kind of stuff, and that's all they do. And one of the ways we find out is because when we're doing our digital forensics and we're watching them do this stuff, we see when they come to work and when they hack and then when they go, and we figure out it's St. Petersburg time, so they're coming in for work, they're hacking, and then they're going home. And they're very good about keeping up to the time, and they go home on time. So we know that. So something happened to the Internet Research Agency. They had a massive attack from somewhere that they're not sure where it came from. And it did a similar to a kinetic attack. It wiped some of the databases and crashed the system. But not just crash it by adding too much data. It literally started wiping hard drives. So it started destroying. Now, they both say it's us, and we go, it's not us. I don't know who it was. They have so many enemies. Pick a country, right? And here's the interesting thing about this. In the cyber world, you don't have to be a big power like the United States, China, or Russia. You know, some of the best cyber warfare, NATO does this thing every year. They have a big cyber warfare exercise in Tallinn, right? The United States has never finished first. The best we've ever done is 9th place. Countries like the Czech Republic finished number 1. Norway. Those countries, the Dutch are incredible. They are absolutely incredible. I could do a whole thing on the Dutch. I won't go there, but they do. So what that does is it creates asymmetry in geopolitics. So all of those aircraft carriers and bombers you have are not relevant in the cyber world. They're just attack surfaces. They're just something to be hit. And since they're all talking to each other, we get the guys in the big room and they got the big maps up and there's all these people. Every one of those devices is an attack surface, is a potential vulnerability. So the more of that stuff you have, the more you have to try to defend it. And it gives your adversary greater opportunity to get in. So that NATO facility in Tallinn came about because of the 2007 attack. So NATO, they have what they call a Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence there. And one of the things they did is they created what's called the Tallinn Manual. Was that in the reading? I don't think so. What the Tallinn Manual is, so we're trying to figure this out because we have rules, right? NATO has rules. And international law has rules. What's a war? What's a war look like? Is a cyber attack war? If it's war, if it falls under the laws of jus belli, right? If it's war, can we use a kinetic response to a cyber attack? Is that appropriate? So what the Tallinn Manual is that a bunch of lawyers and policy people and academic wonky types got together and they put together this manual that says, okay, this is what war is, this is espionage, so this is what you can use under international law, the way we read the law, it's an interpretive document, right? This is when you can go blow up things and kill people. Over here, you can just get mad and try to hit them, maybe retaliate with cyber stuff, like do other things. So there's actually a manual that NATO has that they can consult to decide where this is. This has led to a big conversation globally about what are we going to do with this proliferation of attacks from so many different actors, not all of them nation states. There's cyber terrorists. There's hacktivists, the anonymous guys, right? The Guy Fawkes mask, you've seen those guys, right? So we have all these people playing in that space without any rules. It bothers the hell out of me. I need rules. So then there's the big guy. Russia is doing all this stuff. We know Russia's in. They have discovered certain vulnerabilities with our electoral infrastructure. But Russia's not just in there. That's what gets on the news. They've been in Wall Street for a long time. And when they go into Wall Street, what they're doing, they love law firms. They love hacking into law firms because they get proprietary information. Also, if American companies are bidding on projects, often the request for proposal or the service level agreement will have very intricate technical data. They get that stuff. They go after low-hanging fruit. So they've been in all that kind of stuff. They've hacked our power grid. They've been in the grid, as far as I've known, since 2013. But most of it is reconnaissance software. They're mapping our grid, and they want to figure out how it works, and they're mapping the vulnerabilities. So at some time, if they want to prepare the battle space to move from cyber to kinetic, they would attack some of these things and cause confusion. So we know they're there, and I'll talk a little bit about what our national response framework is, such as it is. Oh, let me go back. Yes, these guys. Okay, so I do a talk. My favorite thing is I do this thing called Sun Tzu and the Art of Cyber War. Anybody read Sun Tzu's Art of War? Right? Yeah, fabulous, isn't it? It's so prescient to what's going on now. In fact, I think it is more applicable today in the cyber domain than it was back then. So the Chinese have been looking at cyber as a force multiplier for their conventional arms, but they've also looked at it as a definite and specific battle space that they can achieve real results. And they can shift the balance of geopolitical power. You know, when you're the top guy on the hill, you ever play King of the Hill when you're a kid? What do you do? You try to knock the top guy off, right? So China has we're a focal point for them. They want to knock us off the top of the hill. And I don't say this in a pejorative way against the Chinese. If the roles were switched, I think I would probably want to do the same thing. I'm a little bit more diplomatic. I would say, can't we all just get along? But I can see how they may want to do that. Within the context of China, went through those years where they were humiliated. The country was chopped into little pieces by Europeans and all that. So maybe it's time for a little payback. Who knows? This summer, they had the 19th Party Congress, right? So Xi Jinping, it's almost like a pep rally. He was getting the troops ready and they called it Made in China 2025. And they outlined 19 different strategic industries that they want to take global leadership on. One of them was things like networking, supercomputers, all these biotechnology, all those areas. The way they've been getting the information on which to build this great technological and economic infrastructure as they've been stealing it. It's like a giant Hoover vacuum cleaner. In fact, there was a joke. I was reading an assessment of this saying China's biggest problem, they steal so much from so many people that they're having to literally comb their universities of cyber people to get them to sit down and to analyze all the data they're stealing. And at some point it's estimated they've stolen so much it might take them, if they devote all their resources to it might take them 2 or 3 years to analyze the stuff they've already stolen, and they're still stealing more. So I thought, we're going to bring them to their knees, right? This is the bright spot, right? Because you know how things work in technology. By the time they figure out all this stuff, most of it's going to be obsolete. So, I told you I was going to bring you something bright. This is the bright side of it. Okay. So, I was looking at a report he quotes a Verizon report. He said 96% of all state-affiliated cyber attacks against U.S. intellectual property comes from China. Yeah, okay. Now, I think he does something. He says that the hacking tools were developed by the U.S. I want to qualify. I don't want you to think that all of those hacking tools, DARPA and all those guys, were developed by the U.S. intelligence services and military. Not even close. A lot of the credit goes to private companies, private developers, digital forensic specialists, computer scientists, white hat hackers, if you want to call them that, hacker collectives. There's a whole community of people who develop cyber tools, and not all of it for nefarious purposes. Here's the thing. So I'm taking off the black hat, put on the white hat. So one of the concerns has been from people in the community is that American business has not served their customers well. They develop, because we all got the bright, shiny object syndrome, right? We're primates. We like bright, shiny objects, and we want to play with them, right? See, I got my little pointer here. Right? So what do? When they sell you something, they sell you all of the neat things a gadget can do. All of the wonderful access you have, and it's got all these bells and whistles. What they don't sell you is security. And if you ever bother to go through those 90 pages in the service level agreement before you hit I accept, and you don't, nobody does, we hit I accept. But just for fun, a couple times I read through this. And basically it says, you have no expectation of privacy. You have no expectation that your data is going to be maintained. They can sell it to whomever they want, whenever they want. You don't get a piece. And, and any security for that data is on you at your endpoint. not them, at their data center, on their servers, they have no obligation to protect your data. Now, people in the community have said, okay, companies, so what do? They do pen testing. They hack these companies. The white hat hackers hack these companies. And then they post, this is your vulnerability, these are your vulnerabilities, this is what you need to do. At first, companies used to get real upset, and there was all this talk of legal action. But naming and shaming has a really good effect. So a lot of these companies are now paying people to come in and pen test. They're saying, what can we do to make our website safer or protect the data and all that? But they still resist any government regulation. That is still, they don't want the government involved in regulating that. Europe has done the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, so Europe is heading off in that direction. California's got a data protection regime that's going to stand up next year. It goes in effect in January 2020, and companies will have until June to get their act together. So we'll see what happens whether this rolls out across the country. So General Lee, in fact, I talked to a General Lee. A week ago, the defense attaché from the Chinese embassy, Major General Zheng Li, came to St. Thomas, along with, he was dragging 4 colonels. You know, that's the generals always drag colonels, right? He's dragging 4 colonels with him, and we had a little chat, and then we went to lunch, and we got to talking about all kinds of stuff. And I was playing tradecraft, so I didn't give them my business card. I got their business cards. I didn't tell them I worked in cyber. I told them I did peacekeeping, which I do. That's another course I teach. And then I was just kind of working them for information, getting back in the game to work these guys for information. Interesting thing, so he mentioned that China wants a relationship, but they want a relationship as equal. They want a relationship with the United States, but they want to be treated as an equal superpower. You know, another, the world's big enough, we'll take this half and take that half. Right? World's big enough. And so another one there was a guy named Colonel G. And Colonel G was, you know, we were talking back and forth. He had been the commander of their peacekeeping troops in Liberia under General Lee, because General Lee, before coming to Washington to be their defense attaché, he was in command of all Chinese peacekeeping forces globally. So all the troops that they contribute to the United Nations Blue Helmet guys. And I said, how do they get picked? And he said, they are the creme de la creme. They are the best. They have to be nominated by their commanders, and then there's a bunch of tests they have to pass in. So these are the people that are going to go up through their food chain to top rank. And I thought, our guys better be following these guys and find out who they are, right? So anyway, one of the things that came out of that is we had a conversation about what could we do to cooperate to build confidence between the countries. And one of the areas, I just kind of rolled it out there, is space exploration. We're all NASA people here. I said, well, how about deep space exploration? Now, Congress has put a prohibition of China working with us in the International Space Station, because they said, they're going to take intellectual property. I said, they've got it all. There's nothing left to take. Right? We should work cooperatively in areas like that. And one of the things, and so Colonel G just got all excited about this. And because I said the engineering challenges of deep space exploration would kind of bring both nations together and involve the best and brightest and all that. And it's something that we could then show our people that we work together, we're not always enemies. So where that will go, I have no idea. So we're looking at this, we're trying to build a framework where we can get a handle on. I think China, of the two, China and Russia, I think China is actually the easier nut to crack. Because the Chinese, I believe, are more willing to work with the United States toward a stable world. Let me tell you what the problem I have with the Russians. And in fact, they're working at cross purposes. The Chinese Communist Party and Chinese business, as I told General Lee, I said, it's in your interest that our economy is strong. It's in your interest because we owe you so much money, right? All the securities, and plus we're your biggest customer. Where would you sell all that stuff? So I said, so it's incumbent upon you to make sure we're okay. And they all laughed. They thought that was, and I wasn't kidding, right? So the Chinese, if you look at Chinese Sun Tzu and you look at what Xi Jinping said at the 19th Party Congress and all that, they want a world of certainty. They want a world of certainty. They want a world of where things are managed and they have relationships and they're trading, but they want to be treated as an equal. They don't want to be treated as a secondary power. So I think that is a basis upon which we can build a relationship. And in diplomacy, we call confidence building measures. So you start off with little things. Remember ping pong diplomacy before Nixon went to China? We had people go over there and play ping pong. Well, you start small. So I think China is workable. Russia is completely different, I'll tell you why. One of the people who is the main, I would say, ideological, he informs Putin's ideology, is a guy named Ladislas Purple. Have you ever heard of this guy? Ladislas Purple. He wrote I'd say a short story called Without Sky. And it talked about a world where it was the Fifth World War. Countries switched sides. Nobody knew what the goals were. No one knew why they were fighting. It was complete and utter chaos. But within the chaos, the ruling class always had control. And it's called managed chaos. He calls it dramaturgia, which in Russia means political theater. And he calls himself a political technologist. Putin has bought into this. Surkov pops up everywhere. He popped up in eastern Ukraine. He was instrumental in what was going on in Estonia. So this guy, he goes in and out of government. You know, he's a big fan of Tupac Shakur, and he puts on rock concerts. But Surkov has been known to fund both sides in a riot. Because the riot is the theater. And then in comes the state to put down the disorder. So you have to have disorder to put down, so sometimes he creates it. So I think where China and Russia may be converging in some areas, geopolitically, I think they have different goals. The Russians under Putin, and remember, Putin was a KGB guy, and what was his job in the KGB? Disinformation and propaganda. That was his portfolio. That's what he knows how to do. Okay? And when in doubt, you fall back on your own skills. So with him and Surkov and Gerasimov and all of this, they want a world of managed chaos. That's why the Brexit attack, the Alternative for Germany, what they're doing in Europe, the Gilles, all these people, that's the world that they feel that they're better able to manage. The Chinese want exactly the opposite. They want a world of stability and certitude. And at some point, those two different worldviews, are going to come in conflict. So I think for us, I'm going to put my black hat back on, that's a vulnerability that we can exploit. And we can do so diplomatically. I'm not talking about crazy cyber and kinetic. I'm talking about just good old-fashioned diplomacy and engaging people. And I think, like I said, this is an area that we should work with our partners in Europe and around the world. We have they're begging for our leadership. They are absolutely begging for us to get back in the game and exert some leadership. But I think we can work to drive a wedge between Russia and China. So I know that I've kind of deviated from the article, but he does ask some really interesting questions. And he talks about his conclusions. with China. I think that's workable, but it's not workable in a technical sense. To build the type of secure shell that we'd have to build to prevent the Chinese from hacking, essentially we'd have to cut ourselves off from the world. It's starting to happen. The Chinese with the Great Firewall. Russia just said that they're going to shut off from the internet. They're going to reconfigure their networks. Other countries are building filters to filter out content. India's doing this. It's happened in Iran. This is kind of, everybody's building castles. But I think with respect to the Chinese, there's a bigger deal that can be made, and a lot of it is to acknowledge where they want to go, where we want to go, that we're inextricably bound to each other, our economies. There's no way. They hold $2.5 trillion of our paper. We need them, they need us. I think there's a way out with China. And as China, as it becomes a pure superpower, has enormous global influence, if the world were to see China and the United States work out some of these differences in a mutual interest but mutual respect, understanding our goals, I think some of the other countries would come along. And Russia, that idea of chaos and managed chaos would become isolated. That's my rainbows and unicorns. You got to do rainbows and unicorns. The other, and that's the good side. The other side would be we'd have to spend an incredible amount of money on developing good cyber defenses. We're going to have to regulate the private sector and what they do with their data. We're going to have to do workforce development, hire and train a lot of young people who know how to do this. I know that a lot of businesses want to do AI, but AI does weird things yet, and it's not as developed as people think it is. So, on balance, my diplomatic side says let's work on the diplomatic side. But, we should also be prepared to go the other way if we have to. Let me see if there's a question here. Should I throw out the questions? Okay, yeah, we'll just do... That's my stick. That's all I got. I ain't got any more. There you go.
Okay. All right. You get one over here. I'm a little lame tonight.
Yeah. I think we have questions right here.
I think you've said a lot of good things, a lot of great things. I think one thing that we really have to be careful with is that our ability to develop things is slow. Mm-hmm. We don't think of it as slow because it's been very fast.
Right.
But in fact, if you look at it compared with China in particular, China doesn't have any problem saying, I'm going to develop this AI technology.
Right.
And oh, by the way, there's $100 million and 10,000 PhDs. They're going to work on this problem.
Right. Yeah.
And oh, by the way, they will win.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. is going to say, that's an important technology. I did an AI system 10 years ago. It's not moved very fast. It's not done this. It's not done that. There's not enough money in it. Everybody wants to do their own thing. They want to compete instead of working together.
Sure.
We're not going to win that war.
Yeah.
And we're not going to win this cooperative war unless we are able to put ourselves in a position where we can concentrate on something and develop it. Because that's what the rest of the world's doing.
So what was the value of President Kennedy going to Rice saying, we're going to go to the moon? He set an end date. It was aspirational. Everybody thought the guy's crazy. We don't have the technology. And he says, make the technology.
Right.
So is that type of vision needed now? And are we ready for that? Are we ready to have someone say, we're going to set up some lofty goals? And this is high risk. We don't know what the rewards are at the end of the day. But we're going to commit ourselves to do it. Are we ready for such a program? I don't know. I'm throwing that out for your commentary.
Is the term hacker a job description now, or is there more a polite term? I just haven't seen it advertised on Sunday employment papers.
Actually, but it's funny. So you can get a certification as a certified ethical hacker. Oh, you can get a certification as a certified ethical hacker. So there are certified ethical hackers, and they usually work with these companies that do pen testing or penetration testing of systems. And there's a lot of people who do that. So what they do is the whole question of what a hacker is, they say there's black hat hackers, and these are the bad boys, right, that do naughty things. And then you have white hat hackers who might do pen testing, and they may also help companies. Companies offer what they call bug bounties. Have you heard of this? Microsoft paid out a lot of money recently on a bug bounty. So what they do is they say, we will pay anybody out there to find a flaw in this system. You find a flaw, let our security people know, tell us how you got in, where the flaw is, and how to fix it, and we'll give you money. So this has been a wonderful thing, because you had little groups, hacker forums, right, of black hat hackers who say, wait a minute, I can do the same thing, make money legitimately, and not go to jail? I don't see a downside here. So what happens is that a lot of these groups who were doing some of the black hat stuff are now forming to collect bug bounties and look for vulnerabilities in a lot of the systems that we're all using. So I think that's a positive development, yeah.
A few years ago, after 9/11, the TSA was formed, and now as we go through airports, we go through all the security checks. One of the things when it first started was, it's going to be such an invasion of our privacy, et cetera, and it's a bad thing. And yet now we go through it, it's just normal, common, everyday thing. Recently, in my home office, we got a new computer system.
Okay.
And one of the things that was added to it was the password vault and all for each and every system.
Right.
I'm an old dinosaur, and I'm still learning. I still think WordPerfect is much better than Word, and no one even knows what it is anymore. Doing the password vault and having all this has slowed me down. And it's frustrated me so much. I used to have my cheat sheet with all my usernames and passwords. And my wife kept saying, no, somebody could come into the office and you're exposed. I said, well, sometimes the best place to hide something is in plain sight. But I feel so frustrated about it, and I feel like we're slowing us so down with it, and I'm hearing that from other people. Comments, please? Yeah,
there's a big thing now about using two-factor authentication to access your computers. A lot of companies have run into this problem with, we give these people, make it a strong password, 15 characters and all. It's like, come on, really? So some companies have gone to a biometric. So you'll have a card with a chip in it. You put your card in the computer, and then you put your thumbprint or your fingerprint or whatever, and it reads, and then boom, you're in. And so there's talk that apparently Microsoft is actually looking at developing a password-less system for down the road for enterprise systems. And they're kind of looking at it two ways. They're wondering if people are going to be willing to shed the password. It's going to be a cultural thing to get past that and go to complete biometrics. So what you'll probably see is going to roll out for business applications first, and see what the reception is, and then maybe roll out. But I fully expect within maybe 5 years, passwords are going to be gone, and you're going to have a key fob. One of those fobs where you get a number each time. Yeah, or it'll be totally biometric, voice activated, the whole bit. It'll be like Star Trek. You'll talk to your computer. Hey, computer. And then it's mad at you and won't come on. Okay. Yes.
You mentioned about cooperating with the Chinese, and they are. I guess you alluded to the fact that if the U.S. recognize them equal power, then they will be willing to kind of behave themselves better.
Yes,
they
something
use
interesting.
that term. But so far, we haven't seen that sign.
Right.
This so-called espionage and intellectual property stealing, it has been going on for 2 decades now.
Right.
And there have been several times during Bush administration, Obama administration, we had a negotiation and they agreed to, yes, we will, stop it. But nothing happened.
Yeah,
And so the point is that you got their state control system, basically. They throw money, and when they do things in China, it's a massive scale. It's not, as you said, that
Right, sure.
employ 10,000 PhDs to work on the project. And so you have that system on their side. Our system is more open-ended. Any expert here is willing to share his or her knowledge, okay? As a consultant, for example.
Sure.
Okay? So in this a kind of environment and where geopolitically China has bigger and much, I think they have to be not just equal, but master of their own destiny.
Here's the hook.
South China and so forth.
There's always a hook. Here's the hook. We're the number one customer. In a bizarre way, our massive trade deficit and the fact that they hold $2.5 trillion of U.S. paper gives us enormous leverage. In a weird way, it does. There's an old saying, you never let somebody owe you too much money, right? Because you'll never get it back if you want it back. So they're tied to the dollar economy even as they're going out and they're trying to make the renminbi the global reserve currency. This is what really sticks in their craw, is that the U.S. dollar is still the global reserve currency. And they're sitting on trillions of it. And they keep accumulating more dollars because of our trade deficit. So the conversation would work like this. Okay. Let's sit down and talk about what you want, and we'll tell you what we want, and we'll tell you where the lines are. We've never had a conversation that stark with them. And so, we can control the value of all that money you hold. We can also keep your products from coming into the market. Not even with the tariff. If we have information, high degree of confidence is what the FBI says, that a Chinese company is benefiting from pirated technology, we ban you from the market, period. And we do it under a national security umbrella so they can't even fight it in court. We say, no, this is a national security, that they're stealing our technology. Because what happens often is that American companies go to trade shows, there's a Chinese company, and there's their product sitting there on the floor. And when they go to the government says, well, that's your problem, sue them for copyright infringement. Well, how many years is that going to take? So all Congress, because Congress under Article 2 gets to regulate commerce, so Congress just passes a law, say because it's a grave national security threat, that they identify this intellectual property theft, and they say that the FBI will work with the Department of Commerce, and if they make a determination that that Chinese company has benefited from the theft of intellectual property, they are banned from our market. Period. I think that would wake up some people in Beijing. because they're already suffering a little bit of a downturn in their economy. This is one of the big things they're doing with the Belt and Road. They're trying to find other customers. Nobody has the money like we do. So we have this historical moment while we're still on top of this thing, where we can really make a hard bargain and tell them where the line is. And I say we got 3 to 5 years to do this. Once they get to the top, and if we continue to fracture the way we are, we lose our leverage, and then it's done. So that's, if I were king, that's what I would do.
Would you go back to something basic? What is the difference between war and just annoyance by using these cyber things? Like, by the way, a subtest, I would feel so good if it was discovered that it was the Estonians who raced the Russian drives there. Oh, that would be wonderful. Estonians, after all, invented Skype, you know that.
Right.
So
yeah.
It could be, right?
Right. It could have been. That's what I talked about, the asymmetry. A small country with the right tools can take on a bigger country. So this is. I invite you to read the Tallinn Manual. It's very painstaking in how they're drawing that line between what constitutes espionage. Espionage, everybody spies on everybody. And when Xi Jinping met with Obama, the outcome of that meeting was that espionage is okay, but stealing intellectual property from our companies to give to your companies isn't. And so, are we clear? And they said, yes, we're clear. There was an actual, and believe me, I've read a lot of the reports from cybersecurity companies that were working with American companies. They said there was a dip. The Chinese are trying to figure out, do they really mean it? Can we get away with it? What are we going to do? So they actually curtailed a lot of their cyber hacking intellectual property theft for a while. Now let me tell you my analysis of this. They waited to see. They knew Obama was a lame duck president. So once they felt that, he wasn't going to be around, then they could tick that up again to see if they could get a similar type of agreement with the next administration coming in, or they could renegotiate their position. I think that's what they were doing. But there was a dip in the cyber intrusion with respect to intellectual property. Now, we admit, we're going to spy on each other. That's country spy. And military to military stuff, that's fine. But it's our private companies we want you to respect their intellectual property. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. No, they're not. And that's the kind of stuff diplomats love. Because you can negotiate, you can have meetings, preferably in places like Geneva. Right? You have your meetings, you bring in your working groups, you sit down, you see what their position is, you see what our position is. You bring in international groups to sit down and you get together, and then you say, let's meet back here 3 months from now, when it's snowing and we can go skiing and stuff. No, but this is the kind of thing that has to be subject to negotiation. There are international institutions that do this, that make agreements, and then what we do is we get everybody to sign on. The interesting thing about China is that face is very important to them. And they don't like to be told they're in violation of an agreement they put their name to. So what they do, and some of you might have done business in China, they're very cagey about what they put in agreements. They leave a lot of ambiguity into it, so they want to interpret the way they want it. They really don't like a lot of specificity in a contract or an agreement, because then they feel constrained. And then they don't want to be told they're not following it. I think you had a question?
Yeah, just a general question. I know that it's very hot among the younger groups to create an app or whatever and go make a company, go public, make money, they're set. Is, from your viewpoint, maybe, as a professor on a campus in this general area, do you see anything toward what people coming up through college, is there any interest in the cyber fighting? Is it just in the Defense Department or any kind of people in general as a major or anything like that?
Yeah, universities have been, how should I put it? Everything has been so compartmentalized. So in a lot of schools, in your computer science department, they do cybersecurity. Some schools are setting up cybersecurity engineering majors. Some schools have digital forensics. Sam Houston State has one of the best digital forensics programs in the country. They have now a PhD in it. But that's within that framework of computer science and cyber stuff. What we've done at St. Thomas is this course is offered at the Center for International Studies, so I'm tying it to geopolitical issues of national power. Where does it fit in international security and things like that? So it's a different orientation. It's not quite so technical, but it connects with. And then at University of Houston Downtown, one of the courses I teach there is it's looking at enterprise. So we're looking at business enterprises. How can you stand up an enterprise and build security into your system? How do you look for your threats and vulnerabilities and things like that? And there's different compliance regimes based on your sector. What's the best compliance regime, NIST or ISO or whatever? Yeah.
Is the Russian expertise in disrupting elections, right, and having warfare, propaganda warfare, and I was wondering just what is the best way to counter it, at least technologically. I know first we need the political will of our stupid politicians, and that probably won't. Their only political will is to get elected. I'm not sure they're up to protecting us, but is there anything you can do technologically to protect us?
There's a couple of things I want to point you to. One is the Mueller investigation. They indicted 13 Russian military officers. Read the indictment. It is fascinating. When you read the indictment without saying so, he lets you know and he lets the Russians know we were in their network. We know who was hacking, when they were hacking, the address they were at when they were hacking, what proxy servers they were bouncing this stuff off of, how much Bitcoin they were paying to use the servers in these other so that means that we were in their network at a very, very detailed, granular level. They know that now. And the general who is in charge of the GRU, because most of it, you've probably heard Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. Fancy Bear is GRU, Cozy Bear is FSB, two Russian intelligence services. The GRU, that's what we call them. We call them that, these names, code names. But the director of the GRU, after some of this came out, he died suddenly of a long illness. Right? So I think he met, because the GRU has stumbled in so many ways. There was the Skripal attempted assassination, where 3 GRU officers were caught by the British. There was a GRU team that had landed in Holland that were going to try to disrupt you're going to love this. So the International Anti-Doping Organization, right? This is the people who, who test to see if athletes are using performance-enhancing drugs. As you remember, just about the entire Russian Olympic team was banned because they were all cheating like crazy people. So the International Anti-Doping Organization had the goods on the Russians. So Russians sent in a team that was going to go to try to do a combination. They tried to hack in. They got caught. They were also going to try to go physically break in or maybe break some legs or do whatever. But they got caught in Holland. The Dutch police had been following them the entire time. The Dutch police, and this is open source, I'm not telling, the Dutch police had hacked back into the Russian GRU headquarters, put a piece of malware in their surveillance cameras, and were watching them while they're hacking. Then they gave that information to the British GCHQ, which is a British kind of NSA, and to us. And they say, oh, by the way, here's some stuff. But they followed these guys and arrested them at the airport. So the interesting thing is, even on our side, the CIA has said they're going to have to completely retrain all their agents on how to do tradecraft because of how ubiquitous the surveillance cameras are and moving around and using cell phones. They said, tough, you can't even be a spy anymore and get away with it. What's the world coming to? So, yeah, they're changing a lot of this.
One more question.
Okay.
Some years ago, I've been working for federal security agencies, and I have many friends there. And about 2 weeks ago, I met with one of my friends again, and we are all very concerned about when this administration came in, they stopped places such as NSA and other IDA and others from buying high-speed computers. The present administration did, and that just brings a stop to many things. And I don't know how many people realize this.
Well, I heard that in the next budget, there's, I think it's $200 million that is set aside for a quantum supercomputer. So, is that something that's going to roll out in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? But they're trying to get ahead. The idea is that we need to get ahead of the Chinese on quantum computing, so they've set aside a tranche of money to do that. Now, you're right. Why we would stop buying high-speed supercomputers, I have no idea.
It comes out there is a computer in this country presently, it's not yet on the market, that's far better than anything we have.
Really?
And it will come out probably within a year.
Okay. I'll keep my eye out.
And I'll try to see if I have enough money to pay for it. Eric, thank you. Appreciate it.